Welcome to the first Druid class, hosted by me, Zerflex. This isn't like a super in-depth guide. This is more to get people introduced to the class, what it does, what it doesn't do. Kind of go over the traits, what skills you're going to use, and a little bit on how you're going to play in a regular encounter. And again, we can go too in-depth, or it would be like a 200 slide presentation or something like that. Okay, so first big questions. Why do we run a Druid in the first place? Is it because Druid is a big healer? No. Druid provides a lot of good boons. This is mostly Might and Frost Spirit. Now I'm gonna stop doing shitty memes. So what is Druid all about? Okay, so Druid is there to give people DPS. They also do as many mechanics as they can. They can even tank. Again, they're not a good raw healer. Almost everyone can out-heal Druid. Almost all healers, right? Tempest, Ren, whatever else. You're not there to do healing. And Druid can do a lot of CC if properly traded or geared or skilled for it. And provide some other utility and defense boosts. How do you give other people a big dick? That's easy. You give them 25 stacks of Might, you give them Frost or Sun Spirit, even both. You can give them Fury, Water, and Scholar uptime by just healing people up and keeping them topped up. Mechanics. As a Druid, if there's a mechanic you can take, you're gonna take it. Because there's not a lot else to do, right? Your Might is going to stay on people for around 23 seconds with 100% boon up time. Of course, application times and all that will differ. You have a lot of free time on your hands to do mechanics. Off the top of my head, you can push Seekers on PG, you can deflect on Sabbath, pushing Orbs on KC, yada yada yada. A lot of stuff you can do, all the way up to hiding and doing green 2 on Doom. I'd say that's like one of the hardest jobs for a Druid to do, especially if they're the sole Might provider. So it can get a lot tricky, but again, in Guild Wars, what we like to do is role compression, right? Stack as many jobs on one person so the DPS can just DPS and do more damage and kill the boss faster. So Druid kind of takes the end of that stick and just tries to do as many things as possible. Okay, I mentioned tanking on Druid. So how do we do it? Well, you're not really a tank. You kind of just slap on some toughness, either with givers or minstrels, or you can just put on an infusion. Again, you don't really need the toughness unless the boss requires it. And what you're gonna do is you're just gonna do your normal stuff. Some bosses are really easy to tank, for example, Garcival or KC. You really just move the boss when it needs to be moved, and other than that, you really don't have to do anything special at all, not even heal yourself, because the boss sit like a wet noodle. And then you have other bosses, for example, Dina, Doom. You really don't want to put a Druid to do that, because it would be kind of hard. And there's other jobs you have to do as well, right? VG is really hard to do, but I think some people do it on like the really high-end level of stuff. But again, this is an introductory class. So if the boss isn't super easy, I wouldn't recommend taking on Druid. It's more of a thing you can start trying out with like a static or something like that. Okay, on to the actual Druid gameplay. Okay, so first of all, what's the thing above my HP bar? So this is the Druid special mechanic. This is what's commonly referred to as CA, or as people will call it, the CA juice. You can get this by healing people or by dealing damage. The regen also fills your CA juice, and once it's full, you can press your F5 or any other key. You've bound to it, and you're going to get your weapon skills replaced by CA. Usually, we call these CA 1 through 5 for the numbers. And they don't use the CA juice, but they have cooldowns. And even if you enter and if you exit CA and come back in, the cooldowns will still be there. Druid also has these glyphs, which are the new utilities, and they switch functionalities when you're in CA, but they're pretty much useless, so not too much to worry about that. One thing you can do is cancel CA mid-CA, and I would even recommend so, because then you lose a little bit of juice, but you also keep some. And it's important because then it fills up again, and you can't activate CA until your juice is full. Okay, so I mentioned that Druid isn't a healer. That's not entirely true. You're still a healer, but you mostly try to keep people topped up. You don't have a lot of burst, unlike, for example, Firebrand and the Elementalist Tempest. They can save people a lot easier than you can. For example, on River, it's really hard to play Druid because of this. But your healing comes mostly from a little bit of drip, right? So, for example, regen, water spirit that makes people heal when they hit stuff, and also applies regen. Staff 2 is a skill that you can use pretty much off cooldown. It has a really low cooldown and it keeps people topped up. Nature Spirit also heals people. And when you're in CA doing Might, you'll also be healing people accidentally because almost all CA skills heal. Okay, do we have any burst at all? Yes, we do. In emergency cases, you still have, well, obviously you have CA3, that's like the most popular one. It's a big AoE that heals for like 6 to 7k, something like that. It's really good. And it's a blast. I mentioned blast because Druid actually uses combos, unlike almost all other classes. If you played Fractals, you've probably seen people stacking boons with combos. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be blasting water fields to get a combo that heals people. Most common combos are going to be Staff 3, which is a blast onto a Staff 5, which is the water field, a Warhorn 5 into a Staff 5, so blast on a water field, and CA3 into Staff 5, which is going to be the healing from CA3 and then the combo with Staff 5. Usually, I like to spread these out, so either I use CA to heal people or I use combos to heal people. Most commonly, like on VG, after a green pops, you want to use some of these combos to get people up to full. Okay, now we have pets. This can be daunting. There's like a lot of pets to choose from, but in reality, there's like 3 of them that actually matter. Your Iboga, that's your DPS pet. For most cases, it's just going to be your default pet. No reason to swap it out. Your second pet is going to be the Electric Wyvern. This is the best CC pet, so it's going to be your second default choice. And then we have Rock Gazelle, which is another great CC pet. It's almost as good as Wyvern. And say there's a fight where you need a ton of CC, you can even take like 2 CC pets over the Iboga. But again, these are the 3 main ones. For the most part, you're going to be Iboga, Electric Wyvern. No real reason to swap out of those 2. And then we have like the other 3, which are kind of taken in very specific cases. So Smoke Scales are really good if you have a ton of Mirages, because they also use some combos. I think it's Confusion Bolt on the Smoke Scale field. Brown Bear is a couple of Condi cleanses. And then Jacaranda is for immobilizes, for example, Pride on Salt. But again, these last 3 not really taken in a lot of situations. And then the other 44 are useless. You don't need to worry about those. Okay, gearing our Druid. So I'm not going to go too much into specifics. If you want to properly gear your Druid, just check out the Snow Growth page, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to put concentration, healing power, right? More boon uptime, more healing. And then we're going to put some power because why not a little bit more DPS? Like, we literally just need concentration and healing power. The rest is like brownie points. So we're going to put Harriers on everything, and then a Magi ring because we're full on concentration by the time we get to the ring. Food will change this build a little bit. Again, Snowcrows and Guild Wars 2 raids.com kind of goes more in depth with that. But for the most part, this is the default build. With, of course, Monk Runes, as all healers take, and concentration and transference sigils. Okay, your skills. Let's start off with weapon skills. So Staff is going to be your main weapon. Don't camp it though. Very important. I'm gonna say this a couple of times in the presentation. Your auto tag is this laser beam that heals allies. It passes through, so you target something, you shoot a laser beam at it. Everything that's between the beam and you either gets healed or damaged if it's an enemy. One thing I notice a lot of people, a lot of beginner druids do is like stand really far behind the squad and trying to heal people with the beam. Don't do that. That does worse than it helps. Just stay in the stack. It's gonna heal fine. Don't worry about it. And another neat thing is even if the target is invulnerable, you can still press on him, shoot the beam, and the beam still heals people. Second skill, you put a ball on your target and it spins around and heals people it passes through. It's a really good skill. Like you always should have this off cooldown. It's a lot of healing, which people often don't use. So always use this off cooldown. It's a very nice skill. It's got a very short cooldown. Step 3 is the dash and a blast finisher. It's not an evade though, so don't try to go through attacks with it or you will have a bad time. It also doesn't clear gaps, although it does look really nice. Looks like the Celestial Dash from Karen. It is not the Celestial Dash from Karen. 4 is just some roots, not really important. And 5 is a really good skill. So you place down a wall, and instead of reflecting projectiles, it converts them into healing bolts. And again, it's a water field. Remember, blast finishes and water fields are very important for Druid, so keep that in mind. A couple of uses for this wall is, for example, on Karen, it can turn his little projectiles into healing bolts. For Solosaur, the worm projectiles, and for Largus, it's taken when they're spinning around. And again, for blasting. Axe Warhorn, your axe part isn't really important. Try to use axe 3 off cooldown because it applies weakness, and Weavers kind of like that. And your Warhorn is where it's actually at. So Warhorn 4 is a lot of vulnerability. This is good for like adds on split phases to kind of just build up vulnerability from range so that when DPS get there, they can just nuke stuff down. And then this is like one of your best skills, Call of the Wild, which is Warhorn 5. And I even put an image to the side. When it's properly traded, this skill has so much stuff it does. It's a blast finisher, it gives fury, might, swiftness, regen, applies weakness, and it also dazes only one target. The rest is 5 target. So it's a really good skill, and this is why we don't want to camp staff, right? Because we'd be missing out on this amazing skill, and we do need it for fury uptime. Okay, spirits. This is pretty much the reason why Druid is taken in the first place and why Tempest hasn't just taken over. Mostly because we have Frost Spirit. And Frost Spirit is just completely broken because it just gives 5% extra damage to power classes. Doesn't get any better than that. So if you have power classes in your sub squad, you want to take this. Other than that, Water Spirit is passive healing. Sun Spirit is pretty much Frost, but for Conley. It just lets people apply more burning stacks. Stone Spirit is really important. On Snowcrows, you won't see this being suggested on the default build, I'm pretty sure. But this is a really good skill. This provides protection uptime, makes people take 33% less damage, which means that you don't have to heal as much, which means people don't lose as much Scholar uptime. Usually you always want to have Stone Spirit after Frost. And then Storm. Storm applies vulnerability, does CC, and gives some fury, but it's also very situational. Usually, I would not recommend people to take this unless you're absolutely sure what you're doing with Storm Spirit, because for the most part, you don't really need it for a lot of groups, especially for like beginning and for pugs. I really won't take it. Although Snowcrows does suggest this in their default build, I can't really agree with that. And lastly, your Elite Spirit. This is just passive healing. Your active gives stab, cleanses, and it reses 5 little monkeys. If you time it right, you can even like res yourself, right? If you know you're about to go down, you can even press Nature Spirit, res yourself, and kind of save an encounter. And now the other stuff. This is more of some situational utilities you take, because your spirits, if you can, you're gonna have like 5 spirits. Okay, so this is your your tech. For example, you want to take Healing Spring over Water Spirit. If you want to do a little bit of Burst Healing and Connie Cleansing, also Water Field, keep that in mind. Glyph of the Tides, this is what you're going to use to push stuff. So for example, on VG, this is what the Druid uses to push the Seekers. Also on SH. And remember, if you're on CA, the glyphs change what they do. For example, the pushing glyph will be a pulling glyph. So if you go into CA and use the glyph on the Seekers, you're going to have a fun time on VG, for example. Search and Rescue, I think everyone knows what this does. It just teleports people to you. You don't really want to take this unless you absolutely don't trust your squad and want to be a bit of a wheelchair. I would never take this, personally, but that's what it does, and it's kind of a lot of people do take it. Entangle is a big AoE route, again, used for VG Seekers, and also for Burstable Ads. Some people also use it in Sol for the Prides. And then lastly, we have Glyph of the Stars, which is a big AoE channeling skill. If you dodge, you cancel it. It takes for like, I want to say 5 seconds, something like that. And while it's sticking, it big cleanses. And if you're in CA, it's also a res in an AoE. Okay, so how do we build our Druid? Or more importantly, what's important in our Druid? So on the skirmishing trait line, or why warriors love you, the first two, you can either take sharpened edges for more DPS or trapper's expertise. If you're using traps, you want to take trapper's expertise. It just reduces the cooldown. So it's pretty intuitive, right? I want to take a trap, I'll just reduce its cooldown because sharpened edges is kind of useless compared to that. Spotter, you're going to take Spotter. Don't even think about taking hit farms. There's many people joke about it. Spotter just increases precision. It's, I think, about 5% more crit chance. A lot of builds will just assume you're running Spotter. For example, Warriors and Weavers are just going to take it as granted, and if you're not, then people will have to take special food and lose on a little bit of damage. And lastly, we have Quick Draw on the Grandmaster line. Quick Draw reduces your skill cooldown by, I think it's 66%, every time you swap weapons, on a cooldown, of course. So this allows you to do a lot of good combos. For example, if you quick draw your Warhorn 5, instead of having 25 seconds of cooldown, it has like 7 or something. So you can, like I said, it's a really good skill. You can also use this while swapping to CA, to, for example, use your CA4 again, or use your CA3 2 times while in CA. It just allows you to do a lot of cool stuff. And again, all the other traits are kind of useless compared to this. You always take it. And down there we have a couple things. So for example, this lets you do 454 in CA, lets you do CA3, wait a little bit, and CA3 again. Sadly, it also works on like low cooldown skills. So carefully don't swap some other weapon and use quick draw on like staff 2 or something like that, right? Because it's kind of useless. Then we have nature magic. Again, we always want to take this because this makes our spirits actually viable. It mostly makes that our spirits affect 10 people with all the boons, makes them affect a wider area, and makes them not die when they just by existing. Because if you notice, when you resummon them, sorry, they still just die by existing. Let's see, the first one, instinctive reaction. This isn't really important, the quickness part. You're more focused on getting healing power from this trait. Spirited Arrival just grants extra boons when you swap pets. Usually you don't have to swap pets off cooldown, but if you don't have a Warhorn, then this becomes a lot better and a lot more essential for you to provide boons, mainly Fury. Windborn Notes. This is what I meant by trading your Warhorn. This just makes it even better with extra regen and reduced recharge. And then Nature's Vengeance. This is what makes your spirits pretty nutty. And below here we have all the stuff it does. It just makes them good, right? By the way, for the most part, these traits are just going to be on by default for your build. You don't have to swap too many of these, if any. Marksmanship. This is the pushing trait line. You probably did hear like a couple of druids like, oh, you have to push here. This is the trait line you take for pushing for 2 reasons. So when you're pushing, you probably will not have your Warhorn because you want to stay on staff to heal. And in that case, you want to put on Clarion Bond, and this makes so that you use a reduced version of Warhorn 5 when you swap pets. So again, when you don't have your Warhorn, you want to swap pets off cooldown, trigger this, and the Spirited Arrival trait. Moment of Clarity. This makes your dazes last longer. This is the CC part of the straight line. On some bosses, you can take this for like insane CC. For example, on Eyes, this makes using the light orbs really good. It's like 12 seconds of interrupt. That's why the Druid does it. You can even stack this with a Sigil of Paralyzation for like ridiculous amounts of CC. One really good application of this is on Sabir, which has 1,000,000 CC bars. So if you really want to be a cool boy druid, you can even use this on Sabir for like ridiculous CCs and even stacks with the special action skill. And then lastly, for pushing, we have Lead the Wind. This makes your longbow skills pierce, and it's very important because you want to make sure that if the boss is between what you want to push and yourself, you want to make sure that it doesn't body block the longbow 4, which is a push, right? So this is a lot, just big safety for yourself. And then we have the Druid trait line. So in the Druid trait line, we have a lot of stuff that we can play around with, but mainly Primal Echoes. This gives reduced recharge on staff skills, and it makes you daze when you swap the staff. I usually take this if there's any need for CC, or you can take Cultivated Energy for even more healing. Again, it's up to you. Druidic Clarity, the removes conditions. I wouldn't really take it even when there's a lot of colonies because you have to cleanse them for everyone else as well. Onto the second trait line, we have a big choice. So first we have Celestial Shadow. I hate Celestial Shadow, mostly because, again, it's like the default for Snow Crows. They recommend taking this, but if you don't know what you're doing, it can mess people up because of the stealth portion of it, right? Fixations can be lost, and your tank can be stealth and lose tanking for a little bit, which can lead to some interesting situations. So all in all, until you're familiar with like how this works, I wouldn't take this by default. Verdant Etching, this is your glyph trait. So if you have glyphs, you take this. If not, I would just run with Natural Stride because it's not good, but it's the least worst out of these three, I mean. Lastly, we have Grace of the Land. I will talk about this in the next slide. And Lingering Light, which we take if we don't take Grace of the Land. So if you don't want to give out any might, which you rarely should not want to give might, you take this. So what is this Grace of the Land? The Grace of the Land is the reason why we run Druid in the first place, right? Plus Spirits. This is what allows you to give 25 stacks of might to your whole squad. And the way it works is every CA skill gives might to people. 2 per tick, which means skills that are just 1 tick give 2 might each. But for example, CA4 ticks 5 times, so 10 might. CA5 ticks 4 times, so 8 might. The easiest combo to do to give full stacks of might is just use CA4, 5, 4. The second 4 is because of quick draw, and people are all mighted up, and you are ready to do your mechanics. Which leads us into the last section, how to play Druid, in a very, very, very small nutshell. So, before we even go into the fight, and by we I mean Druids, or at least good Druids, should know like all of the fights. It's very important for you to know what's going to happen in the fight and what you need to take to prepare yourself. Awareness is also key for Druids. I'd say for a lot of healers, awareness is key. Like you want to know where everyone is at all times, what they're doing, if you're going to need to heal them. But a lot of the good gameplay from Druid revolves around having your build set up for the boss specifically. For example, does the fight have a lot of CC? You want to bring both your CC pets, right? Take a Bogoth, you can take Primal Echoes. Is the fight constantly heavy? For example, on Slothestar, you want to make sure you take Healing Spring. You want to take Glyph of the Stars maybe for Shake, or you want to take Glyph of the Stars for KC. Middle thing, Pizza Attack, right? Do you need to run on Eater of Souls? Then yeah, you can take that Celestial Shadow to help your group just super speed to get those light orbs. But again, be careful you don't invisible the tank. Is Might covered? You can take Lingering Lights, but again, you rarely have Might covered. That's your job. And again, this is a huge etc. Because Snowcrows and guildwars2raids.com, raidguides.com have like a per boss like build and tips and stuff. Like these are small changes you can do to your build, but they're very impactful. Okay, the start of the fight, and before we even start the fight, what we want to do is we want to pre-summon our spirits. As the druid, we're going to make sure everyone is ready to go. If everyone is ready, we summon our spirits, and then we start the fight. Good to make other people do a lot of DPS. And that happens right at the burst. That's when the big numbers start. So what we want to do is, this depends on boss to boss, but for the most part, if we have to move to the boss, what we're going to do is we resummon our Frost Spirit to get everyone the 5% damage. That's the biggest increase. Then we want to Warhammer 5 for a little bit of Might and some Fury uptime. And then we want to do Might, so CA4, 5-4. And then we summon the other spirits. So this all happens in like less than, I want to say, 5 to 10 seconds. But now the squad has Fury, Might, and a flat damage boost. And now you can do whatever. Just let people do their rotations and chill in the back for a little bit. And again, after you've done CA 454, there's no reason to stay in CA. Right, you've done your job. Leave CA, so then it's going to be up sooner. Okay, now we're in the fight. People have their boons. What do we do? So most importantly, you want to upkeep those boons, right? You want to make sure people still have Might, Fury, Protection, Swiftness, and Spirits. And then we do mechanics. So this is why we do mechanics, right? We have a lot of downtime. So between booning people up, we just do mechanics. Uh-oh, the squad stood on lava and they're about to die. One thing we can do is CA343. So a lot of burst healing there. We can also do those water combos. We can even lay down Staff 5, blast it with Staff 3, swap to Warhorn, blast it with Warhorn 5, swap the CA, and burst people. And by God, if they're not up to full, I don't know, they're still standing on lava. For example, someone got ported on VG. Well, you can go into CA, use CA3, and then try to hit them with CA1, 1, 1, 1, 1 until they're back. Is someone down? If you've ever been in training, you've probably heard people say this, but if the fight is very heal intensive, as a healer, you're not really resing people up, unless you have like a juicy res spirit, which is nature's spirit, to get 5 people up. But for the most part, you want to be healing people who are actually resing. Okay, and for my closing words before we go into the Q&A. Again, Druid revolves a lot on knowing your kit, so the build before you go into the fight, the encounters, like encounter knowledge is really important on Druid. You need to know what's going to happen, how to prepare yourself for that. You do all of the mechanics pretty much, so you need to know like how the fight works and what mechanics you need to do, like DPS. People sometimes do a boss a million times and still not know what's happening because they really don't need to. You need to know like almost everything that's happening. And what other people need from you. For example, Spotter is the most important one. For example, knowing that Weaver needs that weakness, so you really want to use 4.3. But again, these are like minor things, and it's going to come from practice and reading the more in-depth guides. For this reason, I really recommend you to either check out Snowcrows or guildwars2raidguide.com, which was made by people from IN specifically. They have super in-depth guides on Druid, way better than this. And finally, I personally used Druid to start raiding because it was in high demand to get into trainings, and I feel like it helped me like understand the fights way quicker than if I would have done it on a DPS. So I would recommend everyone to try and for learning and to not be intimidated. And that's it.